Notre partenariat s'amplifie, s'élargit avec une masterclass, je crois la dernière de ce festival que nous accueillons ici à l'auditorium de l'Inalco, et nous remercions l'équipe du festival Jean Rouch pour cette collaboration culturelle et scientifique et fort intéressante. Cette masterclass, elle s'associe à un cycle qui est le cycle Paroles de créateurs du CERLOM, le Centre d'études et de recherche sur la littérature et les oralités du monde, qui est l'une des unités de recherche de l'Inalco. Quelque part, on a tout de suite eu envie d'unir nos deux structures, la masterclass et le cycle Paroles de créateurs, car le cycle Paroles de créateurs consiste en des rencontres entre un chercheur et un créateur, et un chercheur qui travaille sur l'œuvre du créateur et qui va dialoguer avec lui, mettre en perspective son œuvre. Donc évidemment, on a tout de suite trouvé un écho avec la masterclass du festival Jean Rouch. Je vais tout de suite donner bien sûr la parole à Flora Licha, spécialiste du cinéma documentaire chinois, qui prépare une thèse à l'Inalco. Il nous faut remercier, mais je crois que Flora, vous le ferez aussi, bien sûr le CERLOM, bien sûr le Comité du film ethnographique, mais également l'équipe CESMA de l'Inalco et notre école doctorale pour le soutien qu'ils apportent à cette manifestation. Donc merci de votre attention. Et bonne masterclass. J'allais dire bon film, bonne masterclass.
Merci beaucoup. Alors je commence juste par un mot, une précision pour ceux qui valident ce séminaire. Donc le cahier de présence est assigné juste ici en bas de l'estrade. Voilà. Donc, tout d'abord, eh bien, bonjour à tous. Je tiens à remercier John Paul Sniadecki d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Merci à l'équipe Jean Rouch Film Festival et Flora. Mon français est merdique, so I'll speak in English, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be with you today and to be in the context of this institution and this film festival. And to be with you, Flora. It's a long time I haven't seen you.
Yeah. Donc je ne vais pas réitérer les remerciements que Stéphane Sawas a déjà très bien énumérés. Donc pour ma part, donc je travaille sur le cinéma documentaire chinois. Donc je réalise une thèse ici même à l'Inalco. Et donc, c'est dans le cadre de mes enquêtes de terrain que j'ai eu l'occasion de rencontrer John Paul Sniadecki en 2010. Nous reviendrons sur le contexte de cette rencontre. Et donc, nous avons depuis gardé contact et il nous a semblé donc tout naturel d'organiser cette masterclass, d'autant plus que le comité du film ethnographique suit avec grand intérêt le travail de John Paul. Et également, plusieurs de ces films ont déjà été projetés durant les précédentes éditions du festival. Voilà. Une autre chose aussi, il nous semblait particulièrement intéressant de présenter son travail dans la mesure où son parcours allie à la fois le cinéma et l'anthropologie. Donc, je vais revenir assez brièvement sur son parcours ici. Donc, John Paul est diplômé d'un doctorat en anthropologie à l'université de Harvard. Ses recherches portaient sur le cinéma documentaire indépendant chinois. Il a également en parallèle réalisé plusieurs documentaires, à la fois aux États-Unis et également en Chine. Et donc, ces deux pratiques se sont véritablement nourries l'une de l'autre. Nous aurons l'occasion de revenir sur ce point plus tard, durant la masterclass. Et elles ont également abouti à plusieurs collaborations donc, entre cinéastes chinois et John Paul Sniadecki. Donc, quelques exemples de ces collaborations. En 2012, le Beijing Independent Film Festival, qui est l'un des principaux festivals de cinéma indépendant chinois, a organisé une rétrospective des films de John Paul. À peu près à la même époque, John Paul s'est associé avec deux cinéastes chinois pour la réalisation du film Humaines, dont nous reparlerons aussi tout à l'heure. Et également, autre fait intéressant, c'est que quelques années plus tard, alors que le Beijing Independent Film Festival rencontrait des difficultés, puisque donc le gouvernement chinois mène une politique extrêmement oppressive en ce moment, donc ces documentaires chinois n'avaient plus la possibilité d'être diffusés en Chine même. Et donc à ce moment-là, John Paul a cofondé une association qui s'appelle Cinema on the Edge et qui avait pour objectif, enfin elle existe toujours, de faire voyager une partie de la programmation du festival chinois dans plusieurs villes à la fois d'Amérique du Nord et puis ensuite d'Europe. Voilà, donc ce parcours, ces différents statuts à la fois de chercheurs en anthropologie, de cinéastes et voire même de programmateurs, distributeurs, voilà, nous ont semblé extrêmement intéressants. On avait très envie pour cela d'inviter John Paul pour qu'il nous raconte son expérience. Voilà, donc je vais commencer à, dans un premier temps, faire une introduction parce qu'il me semblait essentiel dans la mesure où le travail de John Paul a été extrêmement influencé par le travail des cinéastes chinois. Il me semblait essentiel de revenir un petit peu sur le contexte, qu'est-ce qu'on entend aujourd'hui par documentaire chinois, afin après d'expliquer dans quelles conditions le dialogue a pu s'établir entre les documentaristes chinois et John Paul et les apports mutuels qui en ont résulté. Voilà, donc je vais commencer à peu près durant une vingtaine de minutes, et puis ensuite on enchaînera avec le travail de John Paul pour la masterclass. Et bien entendu, durant la masterclass, si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez, n'hésitez pas à les poser pendant, voilà, pas la peine d'attendre 3 heures. Et oui, pour terminer avec le programme, donc, nous ferons une pause entre 17h30 et 18h, et ensuite nous projetterons le documentaire Foreign Parts, qui sera suivi d'une discussion. Voilà. Donc déjà, je vais commencer par vous dire vraiment dans les très grandes lignes, hein, parce que bon, je l'ai fait en résumé pour des raisons de temps. Donc la situation du documentaire en Chine aujourd'hui, avant d'en venir justement à la manière dont le dialogue avec John Paul Sniadecki a pu s'établir. Donc je pense que pour comprendre la situation du documentaire aujourd'hui en Chine, il faut bien prendre en compte le fait que l'évolution esthétique du documentaire est extrêmement récente. Elle remonte aux années 1980 et avant, il y avait à peu près, on va dire, une forme dominante de documentaire. Non pas parce que le documentaire est apparu tardivement en Chine, puisque dès le début du XXe siècle, on a vu apparaître donc les premiers films documentaires chinois, mais parce que durant cette première moitié du XXe siècle, en raison de l'histoire politique chinoise, donc le cinéma documentaire a été progressivement assujetti au pouvoir politique. Pour des raisons que je n'ai pas vraiment le temps de développer ici, mais en tout cas, la conséquence de tout cela a été que durant la période maoïste, c'est-à-dire de 1949 à 1976, le documentaire avait pour unique objectif de véhiculer les discours de propagande du Parti communiste chinois. Et donc, les documentaires étaient réalisés sur la base d'un scénario écrit au préalable, qui correspondait bien évidemment à l'idéologie politique du gouvernement. Et ensuite, on venait monter des images qui étaient des sortes d'illustrations de ce scénario, qui étaient pour la plupart tournées en studio. Très peu d'images étaient tournées sur le terrain. Et ensuite, on ajoutait en post-production de la musique et une sorte de commentaire de droit divin afin d'orienter l'interprétation du spectateur. Et l'objectif de tout cela était d'encourager les masses à contribuer à la construction d'une nation socialiste moderne. Donc, je simplifie un petit peu la situation hein, pour aller un petit peu vite, mais la situation était plus ou moins la suivante. Donc, durant cette période, les cinéastes chinois se sont beaucoup inspirés du cinéma soviétique, tout au moins durant les premières années. Mais en revanche, ils sont restés extrêmement hermétiques à toutes les évolutions documentaires qui avaient à leur cours dans le reste du monde. Donc, en fait, la création documentaire est restée extrêmement repliée sur elle-même en Chine. avec très peu de contact avec le reste du monde. Quelques cinéastes sont bien sûr venus en Chine à cette période, assez peu. On peut citer par exemple Joris Evans, Chris Marker, mais finalement leur travail n'a pas véritablement influencé le cinéma chinois à cette époque. Donc, au sortir de la révolution culturelle, donc on se situe en 1976, le pays s'ouvre vers l'international, on passe de l'économie planifiée à l'économie de marché, la télévision connaît une expansion extrêmement importante puisque les foyers commencent à s'équiper assez rapidement en postes de télévision, les chaînes locales se multiplient et donc tous ces éléments fournissent un espace pour le développement du documentaire. Et à cette période, les documentaristes chinois sont véritablement, ils se posent la question suivante, celle de savoir comment, à présent, donner à voir une réalité qui ne soit plus uniquement le reflet des discours gouvernementaux. Puisqu'ils considéraient en effet que les documentaires de la période maoïste avaient véhiculé des vérités entre guillemets mensongères sur l'histoire du pays. Et donc, il y avait véritablement une volonté de rétablir la vérité sur ce qu'avait été l'histoire de cette période, mais aussi sur l'histoire du temps présent et de cette période de réformes économiques. Donc, ces questions vont occuper les documentaristes durant toutes les années 80. On va assister, dans le cadre des chaînes de télévision, au premier tâtonnement, avec l'introduction de nouvelles formes documentaires, un documentaire davantage d'observation, documentaire aussi plus interactif, avec, on commence à interviewer des individus sur le terrain, ce qui ne se faisait pas avant. On expérimente également le tournage en extérieur, qui va petit à petit se généraliser, et puis également le son synchrone sur les conseils de Joris Evans, qui revient alors régulièrement en Chine et qui incite véritablement les documentaristes chinois à aller tourner sur le terrain, mais pas seulement, aussi à enregistrer le son en même temps. Voilà, donc toutes ces... Ah oui, et une chose également, une introduction de nouveaux sujets, qui sont plus proches des réalités quotidiennes de la population. Donc il ne s'agit plus uniquement de montrer les activités du Parti communiste chinois, des dirigeants politiques ou éventuellement des individus qui seraient montrés comme des travailleurs modèles, mais véritablement on va s'intéresser davantage à des sujets un peu plus quotidiens, un peu plus proches de la population. Voilà, donc tous ces premiers tâtonnements sont freinés cependant en 1989, suite aux manifestations de la place Tiananmen. Et donc, à partir de ce moment, les documentaires télévisés vont être contraints de montrer les aspects positifs du développement économique chinois. Donc, ces documentaires vont donc contribuer à, encore une fois, véhiculer le discours gouvernemental, certes de façon plus subtile, plus divertissante, mais bon, cela reste toujours en fait une forme de propagande politique. Voilà, et en revanche, les regards pluriels sur la société chinoise récente et passée, qui ne vont pas dans la direction de cette image politique, qui ne vendent pas le développement économique chinois, vont être assez rapidement écartés. Et comme il est extrêmement difficile de créer des sociétés de production privée, donc l'ensemble de la production documentaire qui se passe donc, dans le cadre des chaînes de télévision devait suivre cette direction. Voilà, donc à ce moment-là, certains documentaristes ont fermement désapprouvé cette orientation, ont décidé de résigner les postes qui les liaient aux chaînes de télévision et ont commencé à réaliser des films de façon indépendante. Donc ils ont été aidés pour cela par l'apparition des technologies numériques à la fin des années 90. Et on a commencé à partir de ce moment-là à parler de documentaires indépendants chinois, puisque ces films étaient produits en dehors des cadres contrôlés par l'État. Et l'inconvénient de tout cela était que ces films ne pouvaient pas donc être diffusés ni dans les chaînes de télévision, ni dans les salles de cinéma chinoises. Donc, pour remédier à cela, ces cinéastes se sont organisés en une sorte de communauté autonome, où ils ont créé leur propre festival de cinéma indépendant chinois. Donc, ce fameux festival dont je parlais en introduction, avec lesquels John Paul a collaboré. Donc, ce sont des festivals de petite envergure, avec un public majoritairement étudiant, urbain, éduqué, Donc ce ne sont pas des festivals qui permettent à l'ensemble de la population chinoise d'avoir accès à ces films indépendants, mais néanmoins, ils avaient à l'époque le mérite d'exister. Ils ont commencé à être créés à partir du début des années 2000. Et donc, c'est dans l'un de ces festivals, d'ailleurs, que j'ai rencontré John Paul en 2010, dans un festival qui se situait dans un village d'artistes dans la périphérie de Pékin. Et ce n'est pas anodin si nous nous sommes rencontrés dans ce lieu, puisque ces festivals étaient plus que des simples lieux de diffusion. Il s'agissait de véritables lieux de vie où la communauté de cinéastes se réunissait, puisque tout le monde était un petit peu dispersé durant l'année à filmer à droite à gauche sur son tournage. Et là, c'était vraiment l'occasion de venir soit montrer son dernier film, soit aller regarder les derniers films des copains cinéastes, et puis d'en discuter jusque tard dans la nuit, et puis d'élaborer de nouveaux projets, de nouvelles collaborations, de rencontrer les membres du public, de rencontrer les cinéastes étrangers présents, de rencontrer aussi les programmateurs de festivals étrangers présents, qui venaient dans ces festivals pour sélectionner des films, des festivals même assez prestigieux. Voilà, donc tout ce contexte, si vous voulez, a véritablement été extrêmement, il y avait vraiment une véritable effervescence à ce moment-là, qui malheureusement a été coupée avec l'arrivée au pouvoir de Xi Jinping, le dernier président, à partir de la fin de l'année 2012. Et depuis ce moment-là, les festivals, qui avaient déjà quelques petites difficultés régulières, ont véritablement, ils n'existent quasiment plus, je pense qu'on peut le dire comme ça, voilà. Les personnes restent, mais il n'est plus possible de diffuser dans l'espace public des films en Chine. Donc voilà pour les très grandes lignes du documentaire en Chine. Et donc, cette introduction nous permet à présent d'en venir à la condition dans laquelle le dialogue entre John Paul et les cinéastes chinois a pu s'établir. Donc, déjà, je voudrais souligner une chose, c'est que ce dialogue, c'était pas une évidence que ce dialogue puisse s'établir de façon et mène à des collaborations aussi fructueuses, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de documentaristes étrangers qui viennent aujourd'hui en Chine, certains qui parlent bien le chinois, d'autres non. Et donc, je pense que John Paul avait l'avantage, d'une part, de parler très bien le chinois, de connaître bien le terrain chinois, également de connaître très bien la situation des documentaristes indépendants chinois. Et cela, je pense, lui a valu déjà, d'une part, le respect des documentaristes indépendants chinois. Mais il y a plus. Je pense que ce qui a particulièrement bien fonctionné à ce moment, c'est que tous avaient des questionnements extrêmement similaires qui leur ont permis de trouver très rapidement un terrain d'entente. Et ça, c'est, je dois dire, un point important, puisque parfois, c'est vrai, quand le dialogue s'engage, j'ai pu assister à cela plusieurs fois dans les festivals avec des cinéastes étrangers, parfois il y a un peu une incompréhension où les cinéastes chinois ont l'impression qu'ils ne comprennent pas forcément exactement leur motivation, leur orientation. Donc là, pour le coup, comme John Paul, c'était son sujet de thèse, nécessairement, il comprenait bien la chose. Donc ça a beaucoup facilité les choses. Donc quel était ce questionnement commun ? Donc, il s'agissait d'un refus de produire des documentaires à discours. Donc, sans aller dans l'extrême inverse, il ne s'agissait pas de considérer qu'on allait montrer une réalité entre guillemets objective en pensant qu'il s'agissait d'une réalité dépourvue de toute interprétation personnelle. Donc, il ne s'agissait pas d'en venir à cet extrême, mais de trouver un juste milieu où l'expérience de tournage, l'expérience de recherche aurait une place véritablement centrale, donc où le cinéaste pourrait se laisser imprégner de cette expérience sans idée véritablement préalable, trop établie de la forme qu'aurait le film en définitive, et puis ensuite, au montage, d'essayer de ne pas produire un discours qui soit trop fermé, mais au contraire de laisser une interprétation qui puisse être la plus ouverte possible. Et en ce sens, le spectateur donc n'est pas perçu comme une sorte de réceptacle passif à qui l'on viendrait imposer un discours, mais aurait un rôle un peu plus actif dans le sens où il aurait une certaine marge de liberté pour interpréter les images. Voilà, donc ça c'est l'idée. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que ces approches similaires ne sont pas, si vous voulez, les documentaristes et John Paul ne sont pas arrivés à vouloir poursuivre cette approche pour les mêmes raisons. Donc du côté des documentaristes indépendants, on constate une forme de rejet à l'encontre des documentaires de la période maoïste et des documentaires télévisés dont nous avons parlé précédemment, et donc un souhait par réaction de montrer une réalité plus authentique, plus proche de la vie quotidienne, en essayant de ne pas trop orienter l'interprétation du spectateur. Donc pour cela, les documentaristes ont dans un premier temps choisi le cinéma direct, qui leur paraissait être peut-être un peu naïvement dans les premiers temps la meilleure manière de montrer une réalité qui soit la plus objective possible. Il y a eu véritablement, dans les premiers temps, au sortir de la période maoïste, un véritable rejet, si vous voulez, de toute intervention du cinéaste, c'est-à-dire du commentaire, de l'ajout de musique. On voulait un montage qui soit minimaliste, linéaire, avec des longs plans séquences. Et bien évidemment, assez rapidement, les documentaristes se sont rendus compte que ce n'était pas aussi simple. Ils se sont rendus compte que les films de Frederick Wiseman, par exemple, qui avaient constitué une des sources d'influence les plus importantes dans les années 80, puisque Frederick Wiseman est venu en Chine, ils se sont rencontrés dans les festivals au Japon. Donc, ils se sont rencontrés que ces films comportaient un travail de montage beaucoup plus important que ce qu'ils ne pensaient. Donc ils en sont un peu revenus, mais néanmoins, ils ont continué à explorer la voie du cinéma direct, tout en essayant de se concentrer sur une notion qui en chinois s'appelle xianchang et qui signifie en fait filmer sur le terrain, in situ. Et donc on en revient à cette idée de laisser l'expérience et le terrain nous imprégner. Voilà, et puis je ne vais pas refaire toutes les explications suivantes. Donc voilà un petit peu comment les cinéastes chinois en sont venus là. Du côté de... Peut-être qu'à ce moment-là, on peut d'ailleurs montrer un extrait. On continuera l'explication. On a un extrait d'un documentaire chinois qui se trouve tout à fait dans cette optique de cinéma direct.
It's an extraordinary film by a filmmaker, Feng Yan. And she is actually, you were speaking about the influence of the American filmmaker Frederick Wiseman, which represents a particular approach to direct cinema. And Feng Yan is sort of more in the school of Shinsuke Agawa, a Japanese filmmaker he didn't make films really about people as he made films with people living in communities. And what you get from this film, there's lots of things to talk about, and we won't talk about all of them. We don't have the time, and maybe it's here in someplace in Paris you can find a DVD and watch the whole film if you like. But I guess what's important is to talk about how it might be representative of a particular approach to filmmaking, and it's always problematic to talk about being representative or typology, so I apologize for that. But the one thing I wanted to point out is just this particular mode that it could be described as ethnographic. The filmmakers that Flora and I spend a lot of time with don't come from an anthropology background. They weren't trained as ethnographers, and yet the approach is one of living with your so-called subjects for an extended period of time and really getting into the sort of local rhythms and textures. And you see here with this film, Bing Ai is the name of the woman, the main character. The name of the film is Bing Ai, and it follows her family in this kind of very close daily life experience as they are fighting to keep their home as the waters are raising during the Three Gorges Dam. So she takes a very particular individual family story and community story to talk about many different aspects in Chinese society today. And a lot of filmmakers use the same kind of approach. It's a kind of, I wouldn't call it amateur anthropology, but a kind of ethnographic commitment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Donc effectivement, c'est effectivement l'orientation, la direction que beaucoup, pas tous, bien évidemment, documentaristes indépendants chinois ont alors adopté, avec bien sûr des variations, des spécificités individuelles. Et donc, pour en revenir donc aux raisons qui ont amené John Paul à également vouloir suivre un petit peu cette direction, il s'agissait davantage de son côté d'un rejet. Bon, il pourra vous en parler mieux que moi après, plus en détail. Mais pour le dire brièvement, tout d'abord, donc d'un rejet des normes académiques dans le domaine de l'anthropologie, où en fait le travail de l'anthropologue consistait principalement à produire une interprétation des réalités sociales et à organiser cette interprétation sous la forme d'un discours écrit. Et John Paul trouvait que ce discours écrit laissait à chaque fois assez peu de place à l'interprétation personnelle, puisque l'anthropologue, le chercheur, proposait sa propre interprétation. D'un autre côté, on a également une forme de rejet à l'égard des normes documentaires, dans la mesure où la plupart des documentaires, notamment le format télévisé, doivent être organisés autour d'un discours qui soit extrêmement clair, des films relativement didactiques. Et donc cette idée lui semblait également un petit peu trop fermer les interprétations possibles, et il a souhaité au contraire accorder plus d'importance à l'expérience de terrain et de tournage et faire que cette expérience ne soit pas juste le sujet d'une réflexion a posteriori sur son terrain ou sur la façon de faire son film, mais que cette expérience devienne une forme de connaissance en elle-même, donc une forme de savoir qui laisse une marge d'interprétation au spectateur, autrement dit, une forme de savoir à portée heuristique. Donc voilà l'idée. Donc ces deux expressions de rejet différentes, la première côté chinois à l'égard de l'interférence du pouvoir politique et l'autre contre un cadre académique jugé trop contraignant, trop normatif, ont donc convergé toutes les deux vers cette même approche. Et donc juste un mot pour conclure. Il est intéressant, je pense, de dire que même si les documentaristes, enfin en tout cas une partie des documentaristes chinois, une grande partie, et John Paul avait une vision assez similaire du documentaire, ils ont quand même des formations, des expériences extrêmement différentes à l'origine, et donc ils se sont quand même beaucoup apportés mutuellement dans le cadre de ce dialogue qui s'est amorcé et qui a ensuite ne s'est jamais vraiment terminé. Et donc, je pense que du côté des documentaristes chinois, ils ont véritablement apporté à John Paul ce sentiment de responsabilité sociale que nécessairement on a quand on tourne des documentaires. Il y a toujours quand même un engagement politique, même s'il n'est pas clairement revendiqué. Mais dans le cas des documentaristes chinois, ils lui ont vraiment fait prendre conscience, et à toutes les personnes d'ailleurs qui les fréquentent, qu'on ne peut pas réaliser un film en Chine sans se sentir investi d'une mission politique extrêmement importante, dans la mesure où les médias officiels ne laissent aucun espace pour les voix de la population, pour parler des événements passés de l'histoire, qui soient autres que ceux de la lecture officielle du parti. Et donc, on ne peut pas faire abstraction de cela, on ne peut pas, c'est impossible. Et donc, je pense qu'ils ont transmis véritablement cela, et on aura l'occasion d'y revenir, ce besoin d'enregistrer aussi les témoignages des gens, de les enregistrer comme une trace, une sorte de mémoire non officielle qu'on viendrait écrire. De l'autre côté, je pense que John Paul, qui est arrivé donc avec une formation universitaire, beaucoup de références diverses, une réflexion déjà sur l'esthétique, a permis d'apporter un autre regard, une certaine ouverture, dans la mesure où ce sentiment de responsabilité sociale peut parfois s'avérer extrêmement pesant, et que, effectivement, beaucoup de documentaristes ont parfois des difficultés à prendre de la distance. Il est effectivement très dur de le faire dans un contexte encore autoritaire en Chine. Et donc parfois, ce sentiment de responsabilité, ce besoin de tout documenter et de tout conserver en mémoire, prenait souvent le pas sur une réflexion sur l'esthétique qui passait vraiment au second plan. Bon, je dis ça, ce n'est pas le cas de tout le monde, hein, mais quand même d'une grande partie. Et justement, John Paul leur a montré, je pense, un peu plus qu'il était possible de garder cet engagement social tout en nourrissant à côté une réflexion sur la forme documentaire et une forme qui ne soit plus forcément toujours du cinéma direct, mais qui puisse être davantage expérimentale ou réflexive. Voilà. Alors, ce n'est pas John Paul tout seul qui a fait ça, hein. D'autres documentaristes chinois un peu plus minoritaires, si vous voulez, étaient déjà un peu dans cette perspective. Et c'est vrai que cette perspective restait extrêmement minoritaire jusqu'au début des années 2010. Et c'est véritablement seulement récemment que les documentaristes chinois se sentent beaucoup plus libres d'aller explorer différentes voies d'un point de vue formel et esthétique, alors qu'avant, ils se sentaient trop pris par cette responsabilité sociale et se disaient non, non, il n'y a que le cinéma direct qui peut correspondre, sinon on en vient à faire un film d'art et on oublie notre responsabilité sociale. Or, il est possible, a priori, de trouver une forme d'équilibre entre les deux. Voilà, donc j'en ai fini pour ma présentation. Avec John Paul, donc on s'est concerté, on voulait vous montrer un dernier extrait d'un documentaire chinois, donc l'un des tout premiers films que John Paul a eu l'occasion de voir et qui a beaucoup influencé son travail. Voilà, donc on va montrer cet extrait. Et puis après, je pense qu'on peut faire une petite pause de 5-10 minutes, pas plus. Et puis après, voilà, on parlera du travail de John Paul.
Super. And I'm really happy that we had a chance to show you just a little bit of Wang Wo's film, Outside. Wang Wo is a good friend of mine, but he also was a major figure, is a major figure in this art village that Flora referred to called Songzhuang on the eastern edge of Beijing. And he's the person who designed the Cinematheque, where we watched all the films when we used to be able to hold the Beijing Independent Film Festival. He was one of the most important teachers in the Li Xianting Film School, an independent space, an alternative space, not the Beijing Film Academy, but another space for learning and speaking about both film production but also film appreciation. He's a painter and a graphic artist and a filmmaker, and I had already started making films in China, and then I saw this film, Wai Mian, Outside. And I was just so overjoyed when I did see it because it had this... I mean, Feng Yan's film that we saw, the first one, is fabulous because it's not, even though it uses an ethnographic kind of mode of engagement, it's not a boring, really stale, slow ethnographic film that's trying to sort of give a discursive account of cultural experience. It's about putting us into a particular relationship with a person, with a group, and having us appreciate a very rich and nuanced depiction of that experience. And then Wang Wo has this wonderful playfulness, this experimentation, this sort of painterly eye with the way that he frames and the way that he moves. He's not trying to give us any kind of deep psychology about one individual person. He's actually engaged in a more expansive and sort of experimental depiction of collective experience, of what it means to be a part of a community, what it means to be a product of a built environment, of architecture, of culture, of all these kinds of things. And so it's really nice to also show it because just yesterday I got a Weixin, which is like the WhatsApp of China, and he was telling me that he's going to probably retire from filmmaking, which really made me feel quite sad. Because of the difficulties in China with independent documentary that Flora was talking about, he actually came to the States and lived with me for a while with his family, and now he's in Maryland, which is near Washington, D.C., and he's completely bored and doesn't feel like... And of course, you know, the United States is also a very depressing place right now as well. And so he feels really sort of how do you say that? Human. He feels really depressed. And so it's nice to have an opportunity to show his older film here. This is a 2007 film, to share it with you all here. I just took a photograph and sent it to him, so I hope it can encourage him a little bit. And so just like Wang Wo, I'm also really interested in collective experience and public space. And me speaking like this, is this, can you understand what okay, I'm not speaking too fast. I have a tendency to go really fast. And so what I'd like to do now is just to show you clips from films I've made, talk a little bit about each project, about some of my process, some of the development, but at any time that you have a question or a critique or something you'd like to add, please feel free to raise a hand, or maybe shouting won't work very well. I have the microphone, so I have total control, but I can open it up for you, and maybe we can find a way to, oh, we have a microphone, so you can have some power too. So if there's no questions right now, I'm going to pause just 1 second in case you do have a question. Okay, I'm going to show you a clip of the first film I made in China. I used to make films when I was an undergrad at a school you never heard of in the States called Grand Valley State University. It's a state school, completely unremarkable, completely mediocre, but I had the great opportunity to teach in prisons, so I would do prison education, because in the United States our prisons are really into punishment, not really into rehabilitation. And so we had this idea of teaching philosophy and literature, and I made a very activist, politically charged film, sort of completely wrapped up in this notion of social responsibility. But I would also make really strange 16mm black and white films full of symbolism and silly things like that. And my professors had no idea really what to do with me. And it wasn't until I went to this school called Harvard University, where they have a really strange relationship to art. They don't even call it an art department. They call it visual and environmental studies. But in visual and environmental studies, that's where you do your sculpture, your painting, photography, and film. And it's only for the undergrads, the real Harvard people. Us graduate students were not allowed into those classes. We could apply, and we'd have to wait for months and months and years, and maybe we could get in. But Lucien Taylor, who you may know from the film Leviathan and Sweetgrass, he's an anthropologist as well, he noticed this missing part in Harvard, and he built the sensory ethnography lab, which is a very sort of maybe borderline pretentious term, but it has a reason for its name. It's seeking to move beyond our sort of logocentric, language-focused, language-centric approach to both filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, and anthropology, and try to bring together perspectives drawn from both anthropology, social sciences, but also contemporary art in a way that sort of challenges and expands the possibilities of the construction of knowledge, both in terms of academia, but also the formal possibilities of cinema. So that's a really big agenda. But when I was first involved in the first sort of offering of this program, I was making a film in China with a Chinese friend of mine named Ding Yi, and we were good friends, but we had a lot of problems with collaboration. Anyone who's ever collaborated before probably knows sometimes they can be lovely, other times they can be totally fraught. And I was having so many complications that I actually had to say, I can't do this anymore. And I went back. We were up in the northeastern corner of China in Manchuria, near the border of Russia. And I escaped with my camera. I said, go ahead, you make the film, I'm leaving. And I went back to Harbin, which is the capital of the province of Heilongjiang. And we had a layover there, and I was exploring the Songhua River, which is a river that runs through Harbin. It's the mother river of the city, but there's also a park called Stalin Park that runs along the river, right where Central Avenue with all the Russian architecture meets the river. And I started to explore that public space with my camera over 2 weeks, and it was a wonderful, sort of liberating experience, because I had all this ethically and formally very constraining collaboration, and then instead I was able to be totally free and record for 2 weeks along the banks of the river. And so I'll just show you some excerpts from that. This is not the way the film is edited. These are scenes taken out of a 30-minute film. And we're going to try to pop off the lights. So after making that film, I came back to the States. And my colleague, who's a French anthropologist, Verena Paravel, who maybe some of you may know, her work.
Just maybe a few words about the lieu.
What's that?
I mean, wanted to talk about the relationship.
Sure.
Or you want to talk about it later?
No, we can talk about it, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, because I wanted to ask GP about the relationship he established with the workers, because in this movie, Devolution, actually you show very little interaction with the people filmed, but you got to know them better, especially one of them. You went to his family, and you didn't add it into the film, but you still felt the need to write a paper about it. So maybe can you talk a little bit about your relationship?
Yeah.
And
So I arrived on that demolition site after having another project that had to be aborted, and I just got off a 12-hour bus from the north of Sichuan, and I was carrying this really heavy camera. Back in the old days, the heavy cameras. Now everyone has very light cameras. And I was walking through the center of Chengdu, and I saw this demolition site right in the center. So I started to say hi to the workers. It was around 5 o'clock, and I started to film. I said, hey, do you guys mind if I shoot a little bit? They said, go ahead. So I was sort of climbing over the rubble, taking a few preliminary shots, and I was just waiting for a manager to come and tell me to get the hell off the property, because it's totally a liability probably to have someone who's not in a hard hat, who's not a worker there. And a manager came and he said, hey, we're going to pause and have dinner soon. Do you want to come join us? And I was like, that sounds exactly what I would like to do. And so a few, half hour later, I go and sit down and drink beer with them and talk. And somewhere in the conversation, one of them says, this is like a kind of fate or destiny that you're here. And so, being precocious, I said, oh, does that mean that you wouldn't mind if I come tomorrow morning and film? He said, yeah, go ahead. So then that began 2 weeks of filming, and I started, the workers had already said it's okay, and some of them told me, I'd prefer you don't film me, so I would not film some of them. There were certain spaces, as you see, like the shower, where I was not going to film them, or where they slept. They slept on old doors from the houses that used to be in that spot. And so I didn't film in their sort of sleeping quarters, but we would work together every day. And I got to know them, but as you will see if you watch the film, one day I come to work to film and they've all left. They've done their job and they're moving on. And there's this kind of letdown that I feel, this kind of naive idea that we would be somehow, close friends and this relationship would continue. It's like part of the fleeting, ephemeral quality of relationships in cities, but also being a part of what they call the floating population in China, this mobile group of people who are basically building the cities and providing lots of services, often from the countryside, almost exclusively from the countryside. And so the film sort of tries to capture that. But in reality, a few days later, I actually found Guo Shifu, Master Guo, who was with a guy who's talking about, hey, if you use the word hooker again, I'm going to kick your ass. The guy with the green army shirt. He was a blowtorch operator, and he and I got along really well. He and another guy, Master Huang, and I got along quite well. And so I found him on another work site nearby. And so we started to talk, and he invited me to go back to his village with him. And so I went back to his village, and I became friends with his family and some of the other workers that were on this site that we were filming, but live in the same village. And so that relationship continued for a number of years. We'd call each other. I would go back and visit sometimes. And then the first time that we hung out, we both liked to drink. And so we were drinking rice wine on my last night before I had to leave. And he and his wife wanted to disclose to me a story about their third-born daughter. And it's a long and kind of difficult story where she almost had to be very late aborted very late in the pregnancy. And they were able to save her and hide her, but she's considered what they call like a black child, an unauthorized child. And they just, I mean, we were getting more and more drunk, but it was becoming more and more intimate and heavy, and also kind of, I think in some ways maybe it's something they felt they needed to share. I felt this, that it had given me a particular experience, and that the fact that I didn't record it is fine. I don't need to film everything. But I wanted to write it into my ethnography, my dissertation. So some things I feel maybe are better to record in a written way, some things are better recorded in a filmic way. It depends on the particular ethics and also content. It would probably be more problematic, I don't know how it is now, but if at that time to have a story that's so critical of the one-child policy with someone's face matched to the story, it might create issues. So in the writing, I could disguise identity more easily. Okay. Do you have any questions so far?
Yes, I was wondering, how much freedom do you have when you go shooting in China? Do you need to have authorization or an interpret with you?
Well, I'm not a journalist. Journalists have to have a journalist visa. And my films are really interested in, what would you call that, 民间? How would you translate 民间?
Non-official?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm interested in making films with people, not with the government. I'm not really interested in making films with my government or the Chinese government, so I don't ask for authorization when I make films. I ask for permission from people who are in my films. And sometimes I don't ask permission for people who are in my films. It depends on the scenario. But I prefer that everyone is aware and okay with being a part of the process, but I don't ask authorities. Now, every time in the making of this film, every time we left the work site, because every night, if you can imagine being on that work site, using a hammer and having the machines banging in your ears, you get really tired. And if you're from the countryside, it's nice after you take your shower at night, you go for a walk to the city center. There's a square, a very famous square, maybe a kilometer from this site, called Tianfu Guangtang. And it's got the tallest statue of Mao. And we would go there often, and you walk through beautiful shops of expensive watches and expensive clothing, and we would walk and just sort of take in all the lights and the people. And every time we left the work site, there was either a plainclothes policeman, so a policeman dressed in sort of civilian clothes, who would ask me what we were doing, or follow us, or say, hey, you shouldn't be filming this, or a citizen of the city. If you can imagine, a lot of nationalistic-minded Chinese individuals, not everyone in China is nationalistic, but the folks who are, if they see a foreigner who's holding a camera, looking like me, I look like a journalist probably, and the notions of journalism, which I'm not, but the notions of journalism in China, of foreign journalists, is that they're New York Times and they're CNN, and I mean, I don't know if they have a negative portrayal of French media, but they believe that the U.S. is creating dark, damaging, critical images of China, right? And so here's yet another example for some of them of me filming a Minggong, a migrant worker, and in a lot of Chinese urban dwellers, this is not a very flattering image. So they would say, 不要乱拍, which is like, don't just film anything, don't film this kind of thing. You should film the beautiful skyscrapers. You should film the commercial centers. You should film the really tall Mao or something like that. So there was a desire to sort of shape the representation, but that desire was based upon an assumption about what we were doing.
Hello. I'm just wondering, how do you introduce yourself when you stopped being on this work site? And what do you say to workers? How come are you filming? And do you explain your work or what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, with all these workers, all the people who are in the film, I spoke with them and told them I'm a PhD. At the time, I was a PhD student. I'm also a filmmaker. I'd like to make a film about this workspace and about how you guys are sort of interacting with the urban environment. And most of them would say, okay, that's great. Some of them would say, that's fine. I mean, some of them would say they wouldn't really want to be filmed, and so I would not push my camera in their face. I'm never really looking to extract things from people. I know some filmmakers, their goal is to investigate and to get into places that other people don't have access to, and I'm less of that kind of trajectory. I make films sort of more or less with people. And, I mean, sometimes you don't know where the film is going to go, so I can't tell them it's going to show up in a university in Paris. But, you know, I made DVDs for all of them who wanted them, and I talked to them afterwards. After I connected with Guo, I also connected with other people who were there, like a woman named, her last name is Xiong, and she said she really enjoyed the DVD because she saw it as a kind of she didn't say salvage ethnography, but a kind of time capsule that she could show her grandchildren, because she said in the future no one's going to be doing this kind of work like we're doing, so they can see what grandma and grandpa used to do for a living. Some people were critical of my film and said it didn't have enough of them, that I cut out all the good parts. And I said, well, what were the good parts? Well, all the scenes with me in them. So I haven't had a lot of critique from them on the making of that particular film. And yeah, so I tend to introduce myself as honestly as possible. You know, with authorities, sometimes I will lie. Because I was filming stupidly in Tiananmen with a little camera in the, how many years was that? 20-year anniversary, I think it was. And 20-year anniversary, and I got in trouble with the authorities, and I just, told them I wasn't making it. I was just a tourist and blah, 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 because that's the easiest way out. But I don't feel bad about lying to authorities.
Hello, my name is Sabrina, and I'm a master's student here. I've been in Chongqing. It's also in the west of China.
Yeah.
I am wondering how many of these workers were married, because I know that there is a shortage of women in China, and I also noticed that if you just let them talk, they will end talking about hookers. So, and I know that this is something that is which is commonplace. So I was wondering how many of these workers were married.
Yeah, I would say, if I remember correctly, I would say the majority of them were married. I don't know out of the 30 the exact number, but the vast majority. Some of them actually had their wives with them there. And this scene of talking about the hooker, I think it was more of a joke than there's a reality to that, of course. But and maybe I'm just a foolish anthropologist and filmmaker, but I did not notice a lot of them going away at particular moments during the night or the day to frequent those kinds of establishments. But I mean, it happens. I'm sure it happens, and there's some difficulties of being away from home. I did cut that scene out of the DVD that I gave to the workers because I didn't want any awkward moments during Spring Festival when they took the DVD home to watch it with their families. And I think in that instant, I'm not saying that no one was doing that, but most people in that group were married, and there were 3 couples that were part of the work units, and the women were actually laboring and working as well. Hi.
Hello. I first want to check something. I'm not sure I understood, so I will first speak French to Flora,
okay.
If she can translate. Est-ce que j'ai bien compris à propos de un avortement qui a été imposé à cette femme à une période tellement tardive que du coup on a pu garder l'enfant en vie.
Oui, c'est ça, oui.
Oui,
Et
alors
c'est
je
un
veux...
enfant qui est non officiel en fait.
Oui.
Qui n'est pas...
Alors, so my question is that an official person has this child some consequences of the conditions of her birth, and is she allowed to go to school, or is she a hidden person?
She was she was more or less a hidden person until she could go to vocational school. Then they paid for her to go to a school in another area, another county, and she studied. How do you say that? Environ.
As I said, yeah,
Beauty. She studied beauty.
L'esthétique, voilà, l'esthétique.
Yeah. I mean, she has some difficulties navigating the system, for sure, yeah. Is she globally normal? I don't know if she has a 身份证 now. I mean, she might have an ID card. I don't remember. I mean, when I spoke at the time, I don't know if she did not have an ID card, an official ID card.
No, is she disabled?
Oh. No. No. I mean, not from my understanding. She's really good with, I mean, she seems really bright and happy, and I think she had some problems physically when she was younger because she was premature. She was probably, I think, 8 months when she was born. Well, Guo Shifu, the man, he was actually the village chief, and he had to force people to have abortions himself. Or he was the village secretary for a period of time, and the reason why he quit that position is because he didn't like to force people to have abortions or give people fines. And then his wife was forced to have this early birth of the third child, but the doctor knew him, so he helped him escape with the child and told him how to take care of the particular, they called it poison. I don't know, I'm not a chemist or a doctor, I don't know the name of the actual material that they used.
Okay,
Shall we
so
go to the
maybe
United
we
States? You guys want to go to America? Okay, so after I made Demolition, I was going back to the States, and Verena was a first-time filmmaker. She had an idea from, do you guys know New York City? There's a metro called the 7 line, and it goes from Grand Central Station all the way to Flushing, Queens, which is a kind of Chinatown. And supposedly, this metro line is the most diverse stretch of land in terms of nationalities represented and languages spoken. And so she was making a film along the 7 line, walking from Queens to Manhattan, and the second stop she hit was Willets Point. And Willets Point is a space of auto body shops, of immigrant labor, where people can, from all over parts of the world, Burkina Faso, Afghanistan, India, but mostly Central America and South America and Mexico, can make a living working on cars and then send money back to their family. It's a very interesting, kind of like an ideal capitalist in terms of petty capitalism system, because it's small shops both competing and collaborating together, cooperating to make this sort of organism of this space work. And she was totally fascinated by it, but she had never made a film before, and she had seen the film that you just saw a clip of, Demolition, and so she asked me if I wanted to make a film with her there. So when I got back from China, we went together and we both fell completely in love with the place, and we shot for 2 years in this space that's been completely neglected by the city. There's only 2 places with running water. There's no sewage, and there's no roads. The roads are dirt roads with big holes in them. But the city was planning to take over this space to develop it into shopping malls and condos and parking lots, because there's a great big baseball stadium, American baseball. The New York Mets play there. They knocked down Shea Stadium, the place where the Beatles first played in North America, and they put up Citi Field, named after Citibank, with all these, corporate logos everywhere, as we like to do in sports. And And so we just decided to spend, at least 2 weekends a month, if not more, going down from Boston to New York to shoot this film. And we shot over 2 years, and we were looking to create a film that could balance the sense of the place, the parts, the actual foreign parts, the car parts that are floating around, the people of the place, and also the politics, so that it's not one sort of overtaking the other, but there's this kind of equilibrium, a kind of network of these components. Let's see if we can get the computer to come back. Here we go. That'll be showing at 6 o'clock tonight, so you can come and watch the full 80-minute film. Those are just a few sampling, a little taste of some of the people that you will encounter and spend time with, and some of the places and some of the parts that you will traverse. Instead of talking more about that film, maybe we just keep going? You have a question?
Yeah, I think, because I think what is particular with this movie that you really enter into the private lives of the people you filmed, and these things you don't show in your other movies. So is it a very nice influence, or how did you, or maybe because you shoot 2 years, so you got to know them better? And
yeah, I mean, I don't know how deeply we are in the private lives of people. I think we had the 2 years of being there every month in the snow, in the rain, in the sun. We became close with characters, and maybe because we filmed with characters, with individuals who become characters in the film. And there's that same kind of intimacy in some of the other films that I made, like in Human, for example, or even The Iron Ministry, or even Demolition. There's friends who come out of that, but because the shooting period was not over 2 years, maybe there's less depiction of that, or less of that palpable feeling. There's a big difference, as you know, if you film for 2 years or if you film for 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
okay, and can you see a kind of difference when you shoot in China and in the States? Maybe it's a stupid question.
I think I understand. Well, I mean, there's differences. But every film, as we'll see, every film is quite different in the way that it's shot and the way that it's lived and embodied by me or by whoever I'm working with, and the way it's constructed based upon a number of elements, whether it's a collaboration, based upon the actual ecology. I mean, these films are as much interested in sort of questions of humans as they are of humans within a broader ecology. Understood as both, non-human animals, but also the inanimate world, the material-built environment. And, I think a huge difference is that I'm, I will never be Chinese, and I will never sort of be a part of that particular cultural game or system, if you want to call it in that way, and that affords a particular kind of privilege and also some disadvantages. So I think, for example, in the film I'm going to show you next, People's Park, there are people who are involved in this film who were in the park who knew us, because we shot there every day for 3 weeks. And so there's a rapport and a relationship, but there's thousands of people because it's public space and I don't have a multi-million-dollar budget to control, nor would I really want to. There are thousands of people who are coming and going through the park who have no relationship to us. And when they see this kind of looking person, they might assume, oh, he doesn't speak Chinese. Or, so let's not even try to bother to talk to him, to ask him what he's doing. Or they might see me as a foreigner and say, oh, he's a foreigner, just let him do what he wants, China's a very hospitable culture. They're usually pretty understanding of their guests, but you're always a guest. So I think that would be maybe a larger difference.
Okay, and maybe a last question, because we talked a lot about your relationships with the people, but also maybe I think we noticed it on the excerpts, but you're also trying to pay attention to, there is a great emphasis on machines, on all these things that are non-humans. So is it since you entered the sensory ethnography lab that you got into this direction? Or was it
No, I mean, I think I've always been kind of enamored and enthralled and totally mystified by the world around me. I'm like a country bumpkin, so anytime I go into some of our amazing human engineering feats or urban spaces or architectural endeavors, I'm just kind of, it's almost like looking at an amazing painting. I'm just like, how the hell did human beings create this? And there's this kind of power that the material world exercises over me in many ways. And so, and I'm not a very, I don't think a lot when I'm filming. I'm a much more intuitive, even though that sounds like sometimes an inexcusable description of one's process. It's sort of my main mode of working. My way of filming is mostly through emotion and corporeality and experience of the body than it is through trying to get a story and put together and make sure something is clear and that people understand this relationship or that relationship. I think, in fact, a lot of my films, because I don't provide that context, whether through language or text or voiceover, there's lots of things that people, unless they're familiar, for example, in one of the films, The Iron Ministry, which we'll take a quick look at, there's relationships that I think a lot of non-Chinese don't understand and don't get, and I don't do the work for you. I allow what is opaque to be opaque. I think Sensory Ethnography Lab gives a space and a justification for that kind of filmmaking and encourages people to experiment. I mean, I think if you look at the films that come out of that particular group of people, they're all actually quite different. They might be similar in the sense that they're all interested in pursuing, something that might be a less explored possibility of film and not something that's formulaic or not yet formulaic, because everything can become a formula given enough time and enough popularity. But in terms of our own approaches, aesthetics, sensibilities, they're quite different.
Okay. And do you have any particular artistic influences? Not necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think the natural environment, music. I used to read a lot of philosophy when I was much younger, and the performance of music I still do, but
you're playing music too.
Yeah. But really out there strange stuff. And of course the fine arts are always an influence, but poetry, even the urban environment is an inspiration for me. Intersubjective experience is an inspiration for me. The sense of just being present and being together. It might sound a little bit hippy-dippy, but it's the truth.
Okay, so it's not necessarily theoretical influences, it's more like...
Theory I usually use to explain what I'm doing before the theory. It's like you read a theory and you say, oh, this sounds good, people are... It's like shorthand, to fit in, to communicate with others.
Okay, are there any questions?
Speaking of hippy-dippy, shall we dance a little bit? Let's have a little dance party in here.
Yes, I love it.
So what we're going to show you now is wait, hang on a second. I'm sorry. I don't normally split the screen like this. I'm enjoying this because we get to have this, which is the calligraphy of Li Xianting, who is a major art critic and curator who was responsible for helping the careers of people like Ai Weiwei, but also all of our friends in China. And he sort of built Songzhuang as the art village it is. And so that's his calligraphy of a film that we'll show you clips of that I made with two Chinese artists that you mentioned. But right now I want to show you People's Part. Why is it doing that? That is a film I made with another first-time filmmaker, Libby Cohn, and it actually also takes place in Chengdu, like Chaitian, and it's a park I would go to during the filming of Chaitian, and I would go there to rest, to give a break from all the backhoes and the machinery and the banging, because it can be exhausting. And I always wanted to make a film there, and I shot in a more sort of way of, with the idea of conventional editing, like putting shots together. But one day I was there with Libby Cohn and Joshua Neves, a scholar from the States who now teaches in Canada. And I was showing them the park, and it was a really nice day. It was hot, but not too hot. There was a light breeze. And so we strolled through the park. We made like a sound walk because it was packed, and there was all these pockets of performance, and it was one sound of someone singing hongo, which are like revolutionary era songs, bleeding into people playing waltz music and waltzing, bleeding into people playing their erhus, and people doing karaoke, and people dancing to Euro disco and very sexual, erotic kind of beautiful celebrations of their bodies. And I thought, let's actually really make a film here. So Libby and I decided to do a single shot film. So in order to capture this concentration of activity, we decided to go against the notion of conventional cutting. Now, as we all know, Dziga Vertov, the great Russian filmmaker, reminds us that editing is always happening, right? Anytime you have the idea of cinema, of making a film, as soon as you are in a space, you're already editing. You're editing before you shoot, you're editing while you shoot, and you're editing, of course, in the way of we think about it, actually cutting the film, whether it's with a splicer or a computer. And so this film is full of editing. It's not that it's an unedited film, it's a completely deeply edited film, but it's a balance of structure and spontaneity, editing and the longue durée, the plan séquence. And we also thought this mode of filming would have a parallel to our collaborators or our film subjects, if you want to call them that, in the park, people who are amateur performers who go there every day like we went there every day, and they perform, whether it's karaoke or dancing, and performance carries with it this possibility of making a mistake, of not being perfect, especially if you're amateur like we are and like they are. This amateur notion of course, not being professional, but also for the love of it and not having sort of the resources. And so we wanted to have that kind of risk, but also that demand of a kind of mindfulness. You know, when you perform, you have to be very mindful of what note you're hitting or what rhythm you're following. And so when you're shooting a long take film, you have to also have that kind of concentration, that kind of meditation. So let's just look at this. And I'm also really happy to share this with you because the film is 78 minutes. The shot that we used was take number 19, so we had shot it at least 24 times. This is number 19. And it actually was a 96-minute shot, but the film is only 78, so we cut off, a good part of the end. But this particular excerpt is like an extra 2 or 3 minutes that we never get to show when we actually show the finished film. So it's kind of like a zombie reanimating what was lost on the cutting room floor, which is always great because, for you as an audience member, when you see a film, it's a world opening up to you. But when you are the filmmaker, and you see your own film, it's like this vast experience of friendships, of connections, of intimacies, of difficulties, of joys, blah, blah, blah. And then it just gets winnowed down to this little thing that's like 80 minutes, or if you're Wang Bing, 9 hours. Which is, still for what he shot and for what we shot, it's still a paltry dearth of stuff, basically. So let's take a look at this. Okay. Chengdu people know how to have fun. That's their motto.
Can you tell us how you did this?
How we did it?
Yeah.
We thought about it in many different ways. We talked to local filmmakers who were very generous to loan us. Some of you might know it's a handheld device where the camera kind of floats, so it creates greater stability. But the problem with that is that you can't tilt up and you can't tilt down with any kind of, without it really shaking off balance. It's more of being able to have these tracking shots where you can run through space. So we didn't use that. Then we discussed maybe hiring a Steadicam, because as much as we think we're good cinematographers, you have to have a lot of experience with a Steadicam, at least a year before you can do it well. But hiring a Steadicam would have been problematic in the sense that it would introduce a third person into the filmmaking team. And this film moves between this kind of, it feels like a first-person video game, it feels like a crazy ride, it feels like a piece of cinema, but it's also, and it allows you to have lots of different relationships to the image, and then for the people in the film to have different relationships to the camera. But we also wanted it to be a very personal film, and it is a very personal film in some ways. It's not completely this robotic feel. There's moments where it has subjectivity, where the camera wobbles and have the weaknesses of a human being, has the interest and the kind of curiosity of a human being as well. So, also, we didn't have any money. That's another reason. And Steadicams are very expensive. And so, even though we had a very nice person say they were going to come and they didn't need to be paid, they wanted all their equipment insured and tickets and hotels. And I never have the patience to wait to make films. I just like to make them out of my life, and not wait for all that money. And so, we decided to use the old school, early cinema method of a wheelchair that we could buy and then sell back used and make back some of our production costs. And we used a very small Canon Vixia SR21 camera. We set the depth of field, the focal length a little bit short so that we could have some kind of drop off of focus. So it wasn't just like this incredible depth of field all the time. There was a kind of softness to the background. So we wanted to hold on to some of the depth. And we put microphones all over the wheelchair, and binaural microphones on Libby's head. We would take turns going back. Binaural microphones look kind of like headphones, but they mimic the experience of actually being there. They kind of feel like you're in the headspace of that park. And people who complain that it's really loud film should go to the park, because it's a lot louder. And so we actually have been very kind to everybody who's seen this film by not making it more percussive and concussive. And so we took turns filming, but because I'm kind of a big, heavy guy, there were certain bridges that Libby had some problems pushing me over, so she ended up being the person in this shot, and for I would say the second half of all the attempts. And so she's hand-holding the camera with no support for 96 minutes. So just take anything, take your cell phone, and just try to hold it out there in space for 96 minutes. It takes a lot of concentration and stamina. And so we shot it over 3 weeks, every day, a couple times. Usually because of the itinerary that we developed by being there, we could only do 1 or 2 attempts a day in the afternoon, because that's when the Euro disco dancers were there and the waltzers in the beginning. If you see the film, you'll know what I'm talking about. And we shot it on the 19th take, this take. It actually continues on and goes out the park and ends on a very sort of quotidian, drab street in Chengdu with buses rolling by and taxis and bicycles. The camera actually finally comes to a halt. But we cut that. But at the end of that shot, Libby stood up and went, "Yoo-hoo, that's it, we got it." She knew it would be the film, but because I have like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder or something, I was like, oh, we need to keep filming more. So we shot like 4 or 5 more times. And we would go home at night and look at the footage and make some ideas and change some things and develop a kind of body language and touching one another to know how we should go and when we should turn left and maybe to direct each other's attention. Any other questions about the making of it or anything else? While the microphone's getting over there too, just to say, Chen Po, the woman who's such a great dancer with the purple and blue shirt, she was on the news like 3 times while we were there. We were on the news as her her foreign fans. They wrote like foreign fans and then had us give a account of how much we loved her dancing. So she's like a local celebrity. So I feel good to be able to tap into local celebrity.
I was just wondering, why did you cut the end?
I think we wanted it to have a kind of really high feeling at the end, that it would have this kind of like cut at the moment of the highest climax, so that you kind of still feel the movement and the dancing in your body, instead of having you leave going out the park and sort of returning to quotidian life. We wanted it to end on this kind of intense, corporeal, sensual kind of thing. And also, Zheng Shifu, Master Zheng, the guy, now he's probably 85. This is getting really hot. The 85-year-old is looking back into the camera. At the time he was 80, but he's looking back into the camera where we cut. So you know the moment when he's leaning back? We cut right when his glasses and his eyes are hitting the camera lens, and you can see us reflected for a moment, and then we cut. So there's this kind of nice upside down looking back. It's like the final gaze, because there's lots of looks into the camera, just as the camera is looking. So it's a kind of a final last look back and sort of interrogation of the gaze, and then the film ends. So all of those reasons. Also, I usually try to cut as much as possible until I feel like we can't cut anymore. So we tried a couple versions of going out of the park, and I felt it was more sort of centrally activating to end at that spot, and Libby agreed.
So maybe we can continue with human.
Yeah, let's go to human.
And you could tell us the story. I mean, how did it start? And
yes, it'll go wonderfully with your beautiful presentation. So the next film I'm going to show is Human, that Flora mentioned. And as Flora also accounted and shared with you, there was ever-increasing antagonisms and difficulties in holding these independent film festivals. There used to be about 5 or 6 kind of well-attended and important, written about and sort of highlighted independent film festivals where programmers from France and all over the world would go to look for the latest and newest Chinese films, both documentary and fiction and so-called experimental films. And increasingly, especially as Xi Jinping was taking power and consolidating power, there's been a lot more difficulty, to the point now where none of the festivals are actually allowed to be held anymore. So we were kind of entering this scene in the last heyday, maybe, and then we saw scenarios of increasing antagonism. So in 2011, I think that the festival in Songzhuang, in the Li Xianting courtyard, he has a film fund he set up. And normally it would be like an opening ceremony with a few remarks and some beer and some mutton kebabs and nice time with friends together, and then we start watching movies in the evening. And so I was sitting there with friends, and suddenly some police officers and some guobao, which is the national security agency, basically, or yeah, not kind of like the U.S. FBI. I don't know what you call it here in France, but anyway, officials came in and were asking everybody, okay, pull out your ID card, pull out your passport. They were harassing people. So a lot of folks would just start to leave the courtyard. And it's in a village, so there's noodle shops and there's cafes. So people would go to the noodle shops and the cafe with the idea, okay, just let the police feel good that they broke up the party, and then at night we'll get back together and watch the movie. And so I stayed there in the courtyard because I was sort of staying the night in that actual place, and I still had a beer to finish. And I was talking to some friends, and I saw Shi Tao, who is an abstract painter, but he's recently, in the past, I guess 8 years, been making films. And they're some of the most interesting, formally experimental films, really involved in like surrealism and formal games within the language of cinema. And I found his work really fresh and really lovely. He does like animation simulations, playful chronologicals. He made a film about the Cultural Revolution, but did the events in reverse and did the time in reverse, which is a kind of a wonderful thing to do. So the film begins with Mao's death, but then ends with the launch of the Great Cultural Revolution, which has interesting, I think, ramifications for the contemporary moment. Anyway, he was sitting there, and I had stockpiled some 16mm film, like maybe 40, 100-foot, 33-meter, 30-meter cans. And as you might know, in China, 16mm film is and celluloid film is not really in the hands, it wasn't in the hands of citizens. It was in the control of the state. So you had to go to the Beijing Film Academy to have access to it and shoot with 16. So there was no amateur or avant-garde like you have in Europe or in the US and other cultural contexts. That was actually, I had to wait until DV, so digital video, that sort of democratization of technology through digital video, when people like Wu Guang and Feng Yan and Zhao Liang could start to pick up cameras and record the experiences of those around them and the stories that were uncovered by the mainstream press. So my key to getting Jean Rouch to work with me was to say, hey, I got some 16mm film. I really like your films. Do you want to make a film together? And he said, oh yeah, that sounds good. And so we decided to make the film then. And we talked about it. We had a couple of plans. We were going to pretend to be like propaganda workers, which is this quasi kind of social worker mixed with, I don't know, so not social worker, social scientist mixed with government official. Have you guys ever seen Huang Tu Di, Yellow Earth by Chen Kaige? With the guy that goes to the far-flung corner of China and records the folk songs and then gets enmeshed in a drama that happens there. We were going to adopt that kind of role of someone sent from Beijing to go to this town, humaines. And humaines is special in China because it's recorded in literary history with Yu Mengguan, the poem, but it's also the site of the first oil discovery in China. So in the late Qing dynasty, they found oil, and that oil really propelled and fueled China's economic development through the end of the dynasty to the Republican era, into collectivism and the Mao era, and into reform and opening. And then in the late 90s, mid-90s, the oil production started to slow down. And then now there's really very little left. And so a city that was once 200,000 now only has between 10 and 20,000 people living there. So in some ways, it's similar to the fate of towns where I'm from, like Detroit, except Detroit was because of global capitalism, and human is because of a natural sort of resource dying out. Anyway, it's known as a ghost town. And so we wanted to go make this film in the ghost town, to take 16mm film, which is a fading medium, and go film in a place that is a sort of fading life world. And we invited Huang Xiang, who is a performance artist, to join us. And we wanted to be 3 directors and diffuse this notion of the authority of the director, to try to have some kind of collaborative, democratic way of working together. This was Jean Rouch's idea. And he was really interested in exploring this. And we went there with this initial idea, but then something completely different happened. When we met the people who we eventually collaborated with, we decided to make a film that would be both an amalgam of our impressions and experiences there, but also including their experiences, their relationship to this place. And so it turned into this kind of collage-like wounded musical about human that's not full of just tristesse and depression, that it's actually also able to include the joys and the interests and the playful moments, because even if you're from a place that is marked in this kind of negative public negative public imagination, you still have joys and you still can sing songs and play with life, and it's not so bleak. Should I talk about the editing too before we show it?
Maybe we show it first.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
We shot that film in Spring Festival period, which is like the Chinese Christmas, New Year's, all rolled into one. It's the time when everyone gets together, people travel back home. And so we worked with many people in the community, some of whom would only tell us their story and didn't want to be in the film. So we would take the notes and incorporate that into the narrative that we were writing every night. Because we basically got there and got rid of our original idea, and then had the sort of the idea to absorb and to learn as much as we could from the experiences of others, and then also add our own touch and create a kind of fictive ethnography, which is a composite of many different stories, narratives, and experiences rolled into several threads that you'll see in the film if you ever watch the film. But our main collaborators were Chen Shuihua, who was a woman, you don't see her in this film, but she was in her 40s and estranged from her family, her child and her husband, and she would watch, her job was to watch apartments that were abandoned so that no one came in and destroyed them or did anything unsavory inside of them. And so she would get paid about $50 a month to do that. So working with us, she had a lot of time, and she had a lot of knowledge of a lot of the empty spaces in this town. And then we had two high school age students, Chen Qi and Zhou Qian, who you see Chen Qi in this, the close-up of her. And they actually go to a high school in another town called Zhouquan. And they have this complicated relationship, just as does Chen Shuihua, to human, because they both feel connected to this place, but it's hard to feel proud or how much you should identify with a place that's marked in this way. And so one of the things we did was play with sound. And there's a lot, all this sound is done in post. It's all non-sync, so it's all Foleyed, or wild sound, field recordings made at the spot and then mixed together. And we wanted the sound to slip in and out of sync with the image. So sometimes it has this really naturalistic documentary feel or fiction film feel, and other times it completely diverges and goes its own way to sort of get at this slippage and get at this kind of uncertainty of one's identity with this place, but also with sort of history in general, whether local or national history. And then we also used the World Wide Web, the internet, and talked to a lot of people. Shuro Tao did a lot of research, chatting with people who are from human, and collecting their thoughts and ideas and remembrances. And then we put together a very loose and fragmented story to create the structure of the film.
It's also about memory.
Yeah.
The stories of these people
who
are working there.
Absolutely.
You had this idea at the beginning, or did it come later?
The idea came the first, after we got there, I was riding trains, shooting the Iron Ministry, and they drove car from Beijing, and we met in Jiayuguan, just north of Lanzhou, and then I hopped in the car and we arrived in Yumen in the midday, like early morning or late morning, and we spent the rest of the day walking around, talking to the whatever souls we could find. There was only one noodle shop that we knew of that we would go and eat noodles and talk and knock on people's doors and just see if anyone was out. And that night we got back together, the three of us back to where we were staying, and just started to talk about what we would do. And then we met Chen Shuihua, and she joined in. And then through her we were introduced to her friends' children, Chen Qi and Zhou Qian, and they got involved. And so then we created a narrative based upon these things. And I actually think it has some little bit to do with Victor Risse's Spirit of the Beehives. Even though I don't think we were aware of it at the time, there's some sort of narrative elements that are similar to that. But the one thing to point out is that human, as it's written there, means, right, that human, that means jade gate. But human, the homophone for that, the similar sounding term, actually means depression in Chinese. So there was one moment when we thought we would call it human, like depression, but we thought that was really overly determining. And so we just kept the name of the place. But people often make that connection and that joke when they're talking about the film. And we didn't know what kind of life this film would have. We actually didn't even know how to edit it after we shot it. And I had to sort of sneak the film out. Jia Zhangke, who's one of my favorite directors, maybe you know him from his film Xiaowu, Pickpocket, or what are the French titles?
Xiaowu.
Xiaowu.
Pickpocket.
And Platform. And Ren Xiaoyao.
Plaisirs inconnus.
Yeah, those are for me, his three finest works. And I was talking to him after we shot the film, and I said, so, you know, I can probably take this film out, because to develop it in China was expensive. And so I had a discount in the US. He said, there's no way you can get it out of China, because there's these old archaic laws that address film. They don't address digital video. I've never had a problem taking videotapes or hard drives in and out of China. I come in with different kinds of cameras and never a problem. But Jia Jiangke was convinced that it was going to be a problem. But when I went to the airport, I just tried to sweet talk my way into having them just swipe it instead of run it through the X-ray, and nobody said anything, and it was fine. Because luckily, Jiaopian could mean, the Chinese term for film could also mean like still photograph. So I didn't say this is like moving pictures. And I don't know how big of a deal it actually would have been. But Shi Ruotao and Huang Xiang said, you take the footage back and you edit the film. And I was like, but this is supposed to be a collaboration. And they said, it's okay, just edit it and let us see it and it'll be fine. So I went back to the States, and I had other projects to do, and I had other things to do, and luckily I only had the time to start to put some things in order and play with a little bit, and I didn't get to work on it. So it sat there for a good probably 4 or 5 months. And then luckily, the next Beijing Independent Film Festival was happening, so I returned to Beijing. We were there for the festival. We were in a screening room larger than this. There was probably 400 people there, and they were showing the opening film, and then someone cut the power. So imagine all of us being cast in darkness during the opening film. So needless to say, the festival had a lot of problems. It was the local government that was cutting the power. Good song. And so you could see some films, but it was like people, the organizers of the festival were taking projectors into painters' studios and just projecting on a white wall, and we were sitting in August roasting our asses off, sweating like pigs in these rooms watching movies, and then like maybe police would come, so you'd have to run to another room. And so I told Huang Xiang and Shi Ruotao, I said, look, if the festival can't be held, maybe we can edit the film together. So thanks to the closing of the festival and thanks to the Chinese government, we actually edited the film together instead of me alone in the States. And we did this thing, and you were there. We would cut during the day, and then at night we would invite people who were in town anyway for the festival to come and give feedback. And we would buy the beer, and we would all give feedback and suggestions, and then the next day we would edit again in that regard. And so the film was sort of born out of that context, which maybe also explains some of its fragmentary quality. Maybe it is kind of appropriate that it has this kind of broken feeling, even as it has a kind of heart of some kind of desire to express. Even the song, the Taiwanese pop song that is the main theme of the film is hear me, listen to me, don't forget me. But yet the structure is this kind of fragmented, broken thing. Yeah. Any questions? We pause a moment, we can go on. Well, there's more films.
Okay, maybe we can continue.
Yeah?
The Iron Ministry?
Sure.
Okay.
So as I was saying, I was writing trains, and I had bought my very first camera that I owned myself. All the other cameras I borrowed from other people or universities. And it was a small handheld camera, a TM700, fully HD, fully manual, but really small. And I was starting to film just things in my life. So if I would come to Paris for a film festival, I would film the streets of Paris and get hit by people in the subway for filming. I remember getting punched by a guy who was really angry that I filmed in the subway. Or if I was in Mexico, I would film in Mexico City. If I was with my mom at home, I would film my mom, you know, doing whatever she's doing. And I started to film my life that way. And one aspect of my life was riding trains in China, because if you live in China, you ride trains everywhere. And I was going to film festivals, I was going to meet with filmmakers, and I was working on other projects. And I started to film more and more on the trains, and my friends thought, oh, this is interesting, you should just make a film on trains in China. And because I learned Chinese by trains. That's how I studied in the university in Shanghai, but I would skip class all the time, and I didn't speak a lot of Chinese in the class, but I would hop on trains, and then when you're stuck inside of a train for 50 hours, you have to learn how to say things like toothbrush, or I need another beer please, or people would make you talk to them, ask you where you're from. So it was the best classroom. And you get to have experience with lots of different dialects, which is important in China because Mandarin is just, the standard way, but there's all these different other modes of different dialects, almost other languages, one could argue. And so I started to really think, okay, this might be a film, and I would take train rides specifically for the film. So like the train that goes to Mao's hometown, the green-skin trains, these old collectivist-era trains that you can open the window, you can smoke a cigarette, you can sit on a wooden bench. They go really slow, the tickets are really cheap, they stop in every town. I would take that train and other trains like that. I would take the high-speed trains that would go from Shanghai to Xiamen, and that's where you go past Wenzhou. And you guys might know Wenzhou because a lot of your Chinese restaurants here are run by people from Wenzhou, but it was also the site of a major accident between two high-speed trains, and it created a lot of anger and public outrage amongst Chinese because it was kind of a symbol of the hubris, of the ambition of China when people are, when a nation is looking to be the biggest, fastest, best, most impressive, but you don't take care of this notion of safety or transparency, you can create problems. And so the two trains collided, and then they fell off the track, and before the search was completely finished, the trains were buried, so a lot of Chinese citizens were really upset. So it's a real sort of moment that symbolizes both the risks that, as I was saying before, that very rapid technological development creates, but also some anger over the lack of transparency and reflection from the government itself. And then I tried to take the train to Tibet, because they built this train to Tibet. When they were planning it, they invited Swiss engineers to come and build the train, because in Switzerland they know a lot about building trains through really frozen mountains and difficult terrain, I guess. And the Swiss experts came and they said, there's no way you can build this train, it's impossible. And the Chinese said, thank you, go home. And they built it themselves. But at the time that I was making this film, it was also the time that there was a lot of self-immolations of Tibetan citizens and monks in not just the Tibetan Autonomous Region, but actually largely in Sichuan and Qinghai, the greater Tibet, the areas off the Tibetan plateau that still are a part of the greater notion of Tibet. But you couldn't as a foreigner buy a ticket to go to Lhasa. You could buy a plane ticket, you could sign up with a travel group, a tour guide, but you couldn't buy a train ticket. So all I could buy was a ticket to Xining, which is the major city before you start to head south from Qinghai into Lhasa. But a lot of the trains that make this film are trains that I was taking in my everyday life as a person living and working in China. And then after 3 years of shooting, which actually coincides with the last 3 years of the existence of the Chinese Ministry of Railways, which was a governmental department that was like a kingdom unto itself, that had its own universities, its own police, its own factories, its own everything. But it also had a lot of corruption. And so now it's been transformed into the Chinese Railway Corporation, which is a semi-privatized sort of entity run by an oligarchy of elites, and people still connected to the government anyway. And after 3 years, and when I came back to the States because I had to get a job, I started to edit the film. And so there's nothing comprehensive about it. It's not every train line in China. It's a lot of different trains. It's 55 different trains, but it's not every particular line. It's a lot of different classes. And it's as much about the Chinese railway system as it is about the relationship between cinema and railways, of course, as symbols of modernity, as homogenizing forces, as mediums that create a particular kind of space-time compression or allow for different kinds of space-time compression. And it's about sort of, in some ways, a personal diaristic account in a more oblique, subtle way. And so let's look at a little bit of it.
Okay.
Now we can either open it up for more questions if people have them, or we can look at new work in progress.
Just a question about this one. Can you talk a little bit about your work on the sound? Because in all your movies you make a great work on sound. But in this one in particular, you were talking, I read that you said that you were trying to mimic a kind of Japanese court music that is called togaku or something like that. That was inspired from Chinese court music. So can you talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we can play some of that music.
Okay.
While we're talking about it. Maybe we just... The film begins with 3 minutes of black. Oh, sorry, without that pop. This is a reference file, so this isn't the final version. But it begins like this. I will stop talking. We can listen to it for 3 minutes, and then we'll talk about it. Where the image begins. And you're in a very strange space, kind of abstraction between the two cars and that the space in between cars with the accordion pieces that connect them, and it looks like railroad tracks and the camera traces along them, and then you slowly start to discover more of the space. But this idea of starting off with sound over black, for me was actually first because I really like classical cinema. I remember when we used to have overtures in the beginnings of movies where you'd see like a mountain, or you'd see like a cliff or an ocean, and then you'd have the music playing that was the theme of that movie. And I really like that component of a kind of soundtrack that's preceding and preparing audiences. But since my film is not classical cinema, I thought it would be best to just immerse us in total darkness and just really focus on the sound. And it's something I make my students do. I teach at Northwestern, and a lot of student films, and a lot of films in general, kind of suffer from poor quality of sound recording and sound mixing and the use of sound. People often just put the nonstop speaking voice or music for fear that people will actually listen to the world and maybe get bored. And maybe some of you were going right to your phones when that played because it's maybe a radically different experience, but it's actually a great way to open yourself up, both as a filmmaker but also as an audience, for a different kind of experience. And when I recorded those breaks, those are train breaks, and when I recorded them in the yard, I thought immediately of that Tang Dynasty Chinese court music, which now has survived through the Japanese version, which has this kind of strange scale and bend to it, right, and these sort of droning long notes. And so for me it was kind of like a musical composition, like musical concrète, as you guys say here in France. And throughout all my films, people, thank you for saying that the sound is crafted in a way that you'd like to speak about. People often ask me, like, how did you do that sound? What did you use to record it? And, the common way to, or the conventional way to do it is to take a good microphone, a really good microphone, and get close to every sound and record it very clearly, and then build up the layers of the world. So recreate the world. So get a little bit of, the ruffling of papers over there, get my voice, maybe get some air conditioner sound or whatever mechanical sounds are going on, and then build them up. But I tend to just, because I work alone, I tend to work with one simple microphone, a Sennheiser ME66 or ME64. They're not very special, they're not too expensive, and I have that mounted on the camera. And I think the key is to just, record decent signal sound, to be attentive to it, but also to allow the complexity and the layers and the evocative qualities of the soundscape itself have its role in the film, have its place in the film. Oftentimes, I think people comment on sound in films like this is because most of the time when you go to a film, you're constantly listening for meaning. You're constantly listening for people's voice, for conceptual frameworks thrust upon the world to make sense of it, right? Stories, ex post facto accounts and reports about someone's life, information, data, these kinds of things. And seldom do we get a chance to just sit and listen to the world and all of its wonder and beauty and terribleness, right? And so I think just pulling back the insistence on language and the insistence on entertaining music or something like that, emotionally charged music, which I'm not against, and Human is full of music. But when you open up the space of the cinema to that, you get a lot of, I think, provocative sensorial experiences.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you have questions about this movie
or anything?
No.
Thank you for screening these films, extracts. I was intrigued by the boy, of course, in the first scene of that film. What was the response to everything he said?
By whom, me or the other people?
Well, you,
Probably.
I guess you were delighted because it was an amazing speech from a child.
I think actually everyone was having similar feelings of just really finding it incredibly funny. As you see the people in the compartment, some were laughing, some, because he was repeating these lines. I think some people were getting tired and just biting sunflower seeds, as they're apt to do on trains. but most of us found it incredibly hilarious. And at first, I thought, and I think a lot of us thought, that he's sitting in the top bunk of the sleeper cars of the train, and that's where the speaker for the sound is. And so I assumed that he's like the world's greatest oral DJ, that he took the structure of the announcements by the train, because it's exactly the kind of way and the tone and the delivery of a train announcement. Then he removed the content that is normal or normative and included or inserted content from the cynical perspectives of the adults in his life, right? About one-child policy, it's taking someone else's wife, and bombs and terrorism, all these kinds of things. He even says Afghanistan and the United States. But in fact, I learned later that he's memorized a not very well-known kind of joke song poem kind of thing that I saw in print on the web that not very many people know about, but someone pointed it to me, which makes it even more kind of interesting than him being a genius. It's like he's memorized this thing that's deeply cynical and is just sort of spewing it forth in this context.
So perhaps other people in the train were also aware of that song, or
I don't know. I've shown this, to lots of different audiences, and the Chinese folks who have seen it have been largely amazed. It was a Chinese artist who said, "Oh, actually, I know that," but I don't think it's really well known. I think some people might know it, but on the train, I don't know. I didn't ask them. That's all I had of my encounter with him. I don't know his age, his name, where he was going. I was actually filming somebody else. Walking through that cabin, and I saw this and heard this hilarious tirade, and so I filmed it. So you are seeing the actual immediate encounter that we had. He's both playing with the camera and hiding from the camera.
So I wanted to know, what is your main studies in anthropology? I mean, for your PhD, you had worked about China or daily people life, or...
What did I write about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
And now what are you working on?
So Harvard is pretty old school, so you can't just make films. You also have to write a dissertation. So I wrote my dissertation about Chinese independent documentary and Songzhuang, these kinds of issues and questions and experiences that Flora and I are sharing with you. It's very much invested in focusing on the filmmakers' sort of subjectivities and the way they relate to their work. It's not so much formal analysis of the films, it's more about the community. So it's more of an anthropological description, a portrait of a particular time and place, which is Songzhuang and this Beijing Independent Film Festival.
Did you study your own work?
Yeah, there's a chapter about one of my own films. That's the last. Is it the last chapter? I don't know. I haven't looked. It's the last chapter. I haven't looked at my dissertation in a long time. I think it's available online if you're interested in reading academic stuff. It's there, I think. No?
Yeah, you can find it online.
Yeah, I think it's called Digital Jianghu. Jianghu is a term, it's a Chinese cultural concept about a marginal or an alternative space of morality in contradistinction to the status quo. Also referring to floating populations, to people who are untethered from the land, who cast out into the world for various reasons and don't necessarily have the kinds of structures and constraints of more grounded existences. I had to get a job. I would have loved to just float around and make films, but I had particular family things I had to do. So I got a job at Cornell University before I finished the PhD, and I taught film there for 2 years. And then I was able to take another job in Northwestern University in Chicago, where we have a new MFA program in documentary media, which is really exciting because even though it's called documentary media, there's faculty who teach installation work and narrative film and different modes, even like web-based formats. So we're looking to find the best and the brightest to join us. and I teach filmmaking there. So I bring anthropology, of course, to bear on to the courses I teach and some of the influences I can recommend to students. But I'm not, a defender of anthropology as being like, the sole discipline and the sovereign, and ethnography being its sovereign domain. I think filmmakers and people are constantly involved in participant observation. It isn't just anthropologists who have sort of a claim on this methodology. And the corporate world knows this because now they have corporate ethnography. And the military knows this because in the US we have anthropologists joining military forces. And artists are really interested, right? There's the whole ethnographic turn in contemporary art, for better, for worse. Probably for better.
Maybe you could say a few words about your relationship now with your two collaborators with the film Human.
Yeah.
Because as we said before, so China now is kind of a depressed country for arts and cinema. So a lot of filmmakers are trying to go abroad in France or in the States. And it has something to do now with your current projects. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think cinema and art are really booming in China, but if you want to do it in an independent way, if you don't want to open the door to interactions with the government, then you're in a tough spot right now. If you do anything that's somewhat confrontational or not with seeking after the Longbiao, which is the dragon seal of censorship approval. So Wang Wo, whose film you saw a little bit of today outside, and Zhu Kun, who was a major organizer of the Beijing Independent Film Festival, and Cui Zi'en, who's the first openly gay individual. I think he might be the first person who announced his queer status on television back in the 90s, right? And Hunan television. He's also a filmmaker and a novelist. They've all come to the States and gotten green cards. Zhu Kun and Wang Wo lived with me for a while. They applied for permanent residency. Now they have green cards. And more people are doing that now because of the lack of viability. I don't know what our recent election is going to do to that mode, but I do know that I'm writing a number of letters for people right now for them to come. And then my two colleagues, Shi Tao and Huang Xiang, I was hoping to make a film, the three of us together, but I don't know what it is with my Chinese colleagues. Some of the best friends, they have these like little breakups, and then I have to work with one of them individually and the other individually. So Shi Tao and myself are working on a project about black prisons, which are informal prisons in China that are used to detain people who a particular government agency or individual does not want that person to have a kind of ability to, for example, petition or bring some kind of egregious injustice to the larger public sphere. And then Huang Xiang and myself are developing another kind of narrative film that's kind of a transposition of the Princess Wencheng, who is a figure, very complicated figure. So back in the, I think, Song Dynasty, but I'm sorry, my history is terrible. I'm an anthropologist, I don't do history. Back in the Song Dynasty, there was a Tibetan warlord who was pretty badass, and he was difficult to handle for the emperor. And so they had Princess Wencheng travel for 3 years out to the Tibetan area where he was to marry him. And there's a whole story and myth around this, and that history is currently being used by Zhang Yimou, who you might know, the famous film director who also organized the Beijing Olympics. Remember the wonderful opening and closing ceremony? He was the director of that. Anyway, he does these live operas where you go to these beautiful locations in China and they have these amazing lights that they blast onto mountains and forests and actors and people flying in, and there's like, light shows and lasers, and it's just kind of impressive. I mean, I saw one, have you seen one? Yeah. Yeah, in Guilin I saw the one, or in Yangshuo, wherever it is. It was really pretty awesome. Well, they have one about Wencheng that basically has her be the bringer of culture, literature, music, everything kind of civilized to the Tibetan land. So she becomes this kind of cultural arbiter, diplomat in this telling of this story. So her story's been appropriated for this purpose. And so we're working on a film that would be a transposition to the contemporary moment of this, in a way, of a Tibetan man and a Chinese woman going back home together to his home, and they go back by foot. So it's a road movie, but it's a walking road movie, and I won't give away the rest.
Okay. And will it be difficult for them to go back to China to shoot a movie? They have the green card?
Well, Huang Xiang doesn't have his green card yet. He's applying for one now.
Okay.
And Shiro Tao is applying. He's not applying for one yet. He's still in Songzhuang, still in Beijing. Yeah, I mean, actually, the film industry is really booming. And I was just in Beijing last month in October, and Shiro Tao, because he needs money and he hasn't sold an abstract painting for a while, he actually took a job as an art designer for a big budget movie in Ardos, in, how do you say that in Ardos? Ardos, in Mongolia Interior, which is another kind of ghost town, but the opposite of human. It was built in this lavish, fantastic way, but then not everyone moved there. So there's a lot happening in cinema. Wanda is buying Hollywood. I mean, there's a real interest in making films that both from, I would say, Hollywood side that translate to Chinese. My friend Karen Xian, who's a wonderful distributor of Chinese independent cinema and a producer, she's also a good friend with the... So, you know the film Star Wars? There's this... there's these people who are selected as like the keepers of the story, like the guardians of the story, and they're the ones who have to develop it the correct way and push it to the next level or something. And they're really concerned because the last Star Wars did really terribly in China. It was a total flop. And so they're like, how do we make this marketable to Chinese? And so my friend was hired to take them to China for a whole 10 days. So they could understand China and then have a better sense of how to make the film marketable, right? And then on the Chinese side, I've had producers, I'm nobody, but I've had producers reach out to me and sit down and say, okay, look, we want to learn how to make a film that will be a contribution to global culture. That we can make films that can fill the box office in China, and we can make all of our money back. That's not a problem. The domestic market is there, which is why Star Wars wants to get in there, right? And why Transformers did, you know, why it keeps going, because it does really well in China. But he said, we can fill the theaters, but we can't make a film that in 100 years people will remember. And so we want to know how to make, what's the formula to make a film that's a masterpiece? And I said, I have no idea. I don't know if a formula exists. And I obviously don't know how to make a masterpiece. But you know what I'm saying? There's this economic interest on one side. Then there's this like soft power ambition on the Chinese side. Of course, there's profit desire, you know, a desire for profit, but also this soft power, this ability to influence and contribute to global culture. Yeah. But for all of us little people, we're just trying to make films and find money. We don't come from a country as nice as yours where you have state government funding, public funding for your wonderful artists to make work. We have to fight and sell our kidneys and our blood to make films.
So, no more questions? We could say a few words about your current projects in America, if you're willing to.
Okay. I'm working on a film right now that we're about ready to produce. We have about 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the middle of post-production. If anybody wants to be involved and get a credit as an executive producer, here's your chance. It's a film I made with a Canadian filmmaker. We shot it along the, comment on dit, la frontière?
La frontière.
De México y Estados Unidos. But it's a kind of a different understanding of the border. It's sort of smashing the border and relativizing the border and looking at the ecology and bringing together, sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. Bringing together stories from people who are researchers there, like archaeologists, and discover bodies, cowboys who discover bodies, border crossers who come across, residents who run into border crossers, vigilantes who are hunting people who come across the border, at the same time that it gives this kind of dreamy, undefined depiction of that Sonoran landscape. So it's like both a semiology of the landscape, but also a kind of sensory ethnography of it. It's called El Mar, like the sea. And it's 3 different films, 2 shorts and 1 feature together, and it's also an installation. And so we're in the middle right now. I should be there right now working on it, but I will immediately go back and work on it. And then I've been working on another film for a number of years about a utopian attempt, an attempt at utopia by 2 queer, redneck, hippie, libertarian guys who are 10 miles from my home in Michigan. They built a place called Rainbow Farm. And Rainbow Farm is it was a place for hardcore partying, lots of pot smoking, marijuana, and marijuana activism, a political activity, getting people registered to vote, speaking out against the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex, a place to fight for this naive belief in the American notion of liberty. And it was a real problem for the local conservative people that ran government. And they harassed them. They sent police in there to try to collect evidence. Things got worse and worse. Eventually the property was raided. They found guns, like firearms, and marijuana plants in the house. They took Tom and Raleigh, the 2 men, the 2 lovers. They took their son away. They had a 12-year-old son. They took him into Child Protective Services. And so Tom and Raleigh, in 2001, gave up all hope. They kicked everyone off the land. They told everyone to go away. They told their neighbors to stay in a hotel because things were going to get ugly. And they got more guns, and they lit all their property on fire. They had a big general store. They had a beautiful band, or a stage where bands would play. They had campgrounds. They burnt everything down. And then they kept their farmhouse up. They put bombs all over it, explosives, and they said, "Don't come down our dirt road or we'll shoot you." And so the police and the FBI got involved, and things escalated. It was a 4-day armed standoff. And at the end, on September 4th, 2001, both men were shot and killed by the authorities on their land. And then they were buried on September 11th, 2001. So another big tragedy happened that day, and their story kind of got lost to history. So I'm in the process of developing that as well as a project. Because I live in the States now, so I have to do some state stuff too. So a couple projects in China and a couple projects in the US.
It's going to be your first feature movie.
Yeah, I think so. We'll see. We don't know what shape it's going to take. I have archival footage. I've done a lot of interviews, but I'm thinking maybe we'll get Woody Harrelson and Ryan Gosling to play the characters and make it real sexy.
Yeah, sure. Should be nice.
Yeah, I'd like to see those 2 make out.
Okay.
So I think we're right on the money with time. Maybe if there's one last question, or should we wrap it up?
Do you have any questions?
I had one.
Yeah.
I was wondering, how do you prepare your movies? Do you actually have your characters before, or you just come out with an idea and then you go on the film and then you meet your characters there, or just? Yeah,
I don't work like a lot of people work, and it's part of my, I don't know, maybe my particular mode, but usually films kind of happen to me in my life. I mean, I feel compelled towards something. I see something, I hear something, I meet someone, I come across something, and then I start to explore that space with my camera. So I don't wait to get money and write the thing and develop the characters, and that's why I usually make my films for very little money, because they sort of come out of my life. Of course, Foreign Parts, for example, if Verena hadn't gone there and wanted to make a film there, I wouldn't have made a film there. She invited me to join her as a co-director. Humaines was a place that we had all never been to, but we decided on, but it also came out of this desire to collaborate. So they all come out of desire. All my films come out of a kind of, they come out of a desire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you consider your film Human as a fictional film? So I saw only 3 minutes, but it looks a bit different, I don't know, stylistically from the others.
Yes. It can be a fiction. It's been a fiction, it's been a documentary, it's been an experimental film. Whatever people want to program it, whatever label they want to put on it, I'm happy with. Just the chance to show it to people. I don't really care.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, was the way you worked on it different from the others? Because it seemed like there were really actors. Like, there was this person staying on this thing. I don't think you just ran across a naked person staying.
You don't think Human is populated with performance artists?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I'm not very familiar with this.
That's one of the directors, Huang Xiang, and he's a performance artist, so he was performing there. Yeah, the film has narrative elements. We wrote scenarios, not really wrote, we designed scenarios. So what we did was we got there, we had one idea, we threw that idea out, we started to talk, we were influenced by the people around us. We wrote a couple of things down, we discussed. The next day we would go and shoot what we discussed. And that would also always change, and then change our ideas. Then at night we'd go back together and write and think of ideas, and the next day go out and shoot. And so we just did that for 2 weeks.
And you had some people who you told them, I don't know, to perform something?
Yes, so the girls in the film, and so Shuo Tao, Huang Xiang, Chen Qi, Chen Shuihua, and Zhou Qian, they all are the main actors of the film. And then we have some scenes where we shot when the Bruce Springsteen scene, there's a scene with My Hometown by The Boss, through the marketplace of Human, and there's people who are just citizens of the town there. Yeah. Because, cinema has always been this wonderful hybrid between fiction and non-fiction.
Yeah, sure, there's no border, I mean, just, do you think it was kind of a little bit different kind of work for you compared to other films, or...?
Yeah, it was different than the other ones that I showed today, yeah. Because the other ones have this sort of more observational quality. I would say Foreign Parts, you have characters that emerge that are sort of performing, and everyone's performing for the camera. It's just that there was more of a sense of us being directors, I think, in Human, in terms of directing actors to do certain things.
Yeah, sure, like this boy in the train, he's also performing, but you didn't tell him to perform, so it was just his initiative.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we wrap it up?
Okay. So thank you very much, JP.
Thank you, Flora.
For being here and for your presentation. And we're going to make a little break. On peut le dire en français. On va faire, plus que mon anglais, on va faire une petite pause et puis à 18h, donc il y a la projection de Foreign Parts. Et puis ensuite, une petite discussion. John Paul revient si vous avez des questions à lui poser. Voilà, merci beaucoup d'être venu. Et merci encore, John Paul.
Merci.